The airplane has revolutionized our world by cutting traveling time that used to take us weeks or months in just a few hours. I couldn't imagine a life before planes. The odds of a plane crash occurring are about 1 in 11 million, yet so many of us are afraid to fly, because who knows, you could be within that statistic on the wrong end of it. That's because even with the probability on our side, plane crashes do happen, but there are survivors to tell us their tales. So this right here is the top 10 people who survived a plane crash. So buckle up, because this list is about to get bumpy. So starting off this list, in at number 10, we have these 3 people who survived a small plane crash in Wisconsin. 3 people, including an infant, survived after the small plane crashed into a parked car near the runway. The single-engine plane lost its altitude, but it is still not clear whether the plane struck something before it crashed into the car. Amazingly, the parents of the infant were the other survivors, and all of them were not seriously injured, and they were all conscious when emergency responders arrived on the scene. Number 9 brings us to an airline co-pilot. Jim Polehinke was at the controls in 2006 when his aircraft crashed during takeoff from Kentucky, killing all 49 people on board. As a result of the incident, he lost his left leg, but he was able to survive from the wreckage. He spent years fighting accusations by investigators that he and the pilot were to blame. Apparently, the flight crew failed to cross-check and verify that the airplane was on the correct runway before takeoff. This is extremely scary, especially because the disaster could have been avoided. Moving right along, into number 8, we're talking about Carolyn Cross. The mother of 3 boarded a Northern Thunderbird air flight headed to BC on October 27, 2011. About 15 minutes after the plane took off, the pilot announced that he had to turn back to Vancouver's airport because of a small oil leak. Now that sounds very serious, and it was. The plane was out of control and everyone on board started to panic. Carolyn grabbed her cell phone and began to type goodbye messages to her children and husband. Really sad moments. She was able to send this message just minutes before the plane crashed onto the ground. She woke up to the smell of fuel and she was shortly rescued by a bystander. She was rushed to the hospital where she was treated for a jaw trauma, broken ribs, and fractured pelvis. She had broken teeth and also a knee injury. There were only 9 passengers on the plane, but the smaller the plane, the deadlier. Luckily, all the passengers survived except for the pilot and co-pilot, who unfortunately didn't make it. George Lamson Jr. makes his appearance on this list at number 7. He was the sole survivor of an airline crash back in 1985 that killed his father and 69 others in Reno, Nevada. Moments before the takeoff, George and his father switched seats, and to this day he wonders if that's what saved his life and cost his father his life. Could you imagine? I couldn't imagine being in that moment and you're like thinking like this. According to reports, the crash was caused by the failure of the captain and co-pilot to control the monitor of the plane's path and airspeed. Number 6, we have a Brazilian soccer player who survived the plane crash because he switched his seats earlier on the flight. I mean, that gives me some chills. Like, if he didn't switch seats, he wouldn't have survived. And for the last one, the person who switched seats with his father. Ruschel recently opened up about surviving the tragic plane crash that killed 19 of his teammates. This was pretty recent if you guys can remember it. He told reporters that he was originally seated near the back of the plane, but he moved forward when the team's goalkeeper asked him to move up and sit next to him. He might have saved his life. Allen and the goalkeeper were among the 6 people who survived the horrific crash that killed 71 people in total. He had to undergo spinal surgery after the crash, but because of where he was sitting on the plane, he was able to survive it. And now at number 5, we have a sole survivor of a plane crash who spent 8 days in a jungle. And we're talking about Annette Herfkens, who was the sole survivor of a horrifying 1992 plane crash that occurred in Vietnam. Her boyfriend of 13 years died in the incident, along with 22 other passengers and 6 crew members. She survived 8 days with multiple injuries and sustained herself only on rainwater. Some passengers survived the initial impact, but died before they can get rescued because it was days later. Now, Annette is working as an author and a motivational speaker. Up next, at number 4, we have this miraculous 13-year-old. After her plane crashed in the Indian Ocean back in 2009, Bahia Bakari held only a piece of plane wreckage for more than 9 hours without wearing a life vest. Among those who died were her mother and 151 other people. The news media were calling her Miracle Girl, which I think is pretty appropriate for this situation. According to reports, the incident was caused by an inappropriate actions of the crew on the flight controls after the plane stalled. Up next, at number 3, we're talking about the miracle child. Cecelia Cichan was just 4 years old at the time when she was the only survivor on a Northwest Airlines flight. Amongst the wreckage was 154 bodies. Only this 4-year-old managed to survive. This fatal crash claimed the lives of her parents and 6-year-old brother. She suffered from horrific injuries, including a fractured skull, broken legs and collarbones, as well as 3rd-degree burns. The flight took off from Detroit runway and and just 50 feet above the ground, the plane started to roll from side to side. The engine stalled and the plane hit a lighting pole which sliced 18 feet off of its left wing. This crash remains as one of the deadliest air disasters in US history. Coming into number 2 on this list, we have Andy's flight disaster. This was a Uruguayan Air Force flight number 571 carrying 45 people, including a rugby team, their friends, family, and associates, that crashed in the Andes on October 13th, 1972. More than a quarter of the passengers lost their lives when the plane crashed, and several others died shortly after due to the cold and injuries. Of the 27 people who survived the initial crash, 8 of them were killed due to an avalanche that swept over their shelter, and the 16 remaining survivors had little food or no source of heat in these harsh and brutal conditions, so they were faced with starvation, and they received a news report to their radio claiming that the search for them had been stopped. So in the mindset of pure survival instincts, they fed on the bodies of the dead passengers that had been preserved in the snow. The passengers were their friends and loved ones. This is a crazy situation. The last 16 survivors were rescued on December 23rd, 1972, but the experience that they had to endure will haunt them forever, I'm sure. Now at number 1, we have a flight attendant who survived a record-breaking 33,000 foot plunge after the jet exploded in midair. This sounds like something that would only happen in movies, right? Vesna Vulovic is recognized as the only human being to survive a fall without a parachute at this high of an altitude when her plane exploded, and that was on January 26, 1972. She fell tens of thousands of feet to the solid ground. She was the sole survivor of the crash, which killed all of the 27 other passengers and crew members. It was suspected that a bomb was planted inside of the aircraft during a scheduled stopover in Denmark, but no arrests were ever made. And how she survived, we'll never know. It was a pure miracle. Well, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll see you guys very soon in a new Most Amazing Top 10 video. I'll see you guys there. Bye.